Hello again. My name is Steve Flanders. This is 15 Minutes to Save America. This is episode number 16. Going to really change gears here and talk about race relations, especially the African American experience. Now, I'm sorry. As a white guy, I feel like, it's kind of insulting to even talk about this stuff, but I don't think anybody else is speaking truth, particularly. And I will try and go about this in as clinical and diagnostic a way as possible because I think it's touching on some very emotional subjects. Which is, I think I figured out what's exactly gone wrong with African Americans, why it seems like the legacy of slavery is still with us. The slave ships, the people came over on what's called the Middle Passage, is where the story starts. Tremendously traumatic, horrible experience. Each person individually was stripped of their identity, their cultural identity, their clothes, the food, everything. In other countries they went to, in the Atlantic slave trade, the Caribbean, Brazil and stuff, they got off the boat, they were put to work, worked to death. Nobody cared if they were speaking their own language or associated with each other as they wanted. In America, they did. Okay, so they got off the boats here, got new clothes, got a new language because it was really forbidden to speak the old languages. Any association with people of the same tribe was strictly forbidden. If the masters could detect it, they'd end it. Any communication with the old country was absolutely unthought of. And so when people came into social cognizance, they came into it as English speaking, non reading, and at the bottom of the social barrel. Most importantly, and what's unique about this experience is I consider that it's basically, they formed an absolutely brand new ethnic group. This is unique in the world. This ethnic group was stripped of every traditional and cultural marker, and every culture, no matter how oppressed, has some vestiges, some residual vestiges of self-governance. Even if you're talking some Chinese village with the Mandarin having their foot on the throat, or some South American village with the Aztecs or whoever dominating. All of those kinds of residual cultural markers were stifled out of the enslaved African American population. Their language, the taboos, the old country associations, all of it was taken. Like I say, other ethnic groups that came in before and after the end of slavery, you're talking the Chinese, Mexicans, Irish, all of the European different nationalities. These days, you've got people coming from the Middle East, others from the Far East, other groups from Africa, Nigerians, Ghanaians, even people from Jamaica. All of them coming in, and they're carrying a form of cultural unity with them. And the typical pattern is they form together in enclaves in cities or in the small towns, and they really relate with each other. And after one or two generations, they rise together in America. That hasn't happened with the African American community, not nearly like it had. People have just come in and gone past. And I think it has to do with this vestige of slavery and the complete cultural deconstruction that took place. African Americans went from slavery, when everything was stifled, any form of self government was stifled, to Jim Crow. And while there were some very noble and well meaning and somewhat successful efforts at self governance, I think of some of the towns in Oklahoma, I think Mountain Bayou, I think in Mississippi or Louisiana, I think of Tulsa before the riot, but it was all suppressed during Jim Crow time. There was still no real self-governance in the African American community. These other groups that come in here, coming from Africa and other places, all have the ability to put it together. the people that were enslaved in Africa and brought over to America, no doubt in my mind, they could have done the same thing if they had been left to their own devices. But not only were they not allowed to do what everybody else does and trying to get things together culturally and achieve some parity in this society, any attempts at doing so were stifled. You weren't allowed to read, weren't allowed to organize, weren't allowed to try and conduct, mutual elevation and raising each other up. The only place anything like that was allowed in the churches, and that was only tolerated as long as it didn't get anything done. So we went from Jim Crow and then through the civil rights movement. There was some equality. Equality was achieved, but the problem is, at the same time that equality came about and equal justice before the law started really being enforced, the Great Society rolled down the pike, which was just the tail end of the systematic deconstruction of local community moral self-government. So that, when black folks got equality, they were becoming made equal in a socialistic system that is really reminiscent of the kind of thinking that goes on in a plantation. So the gist of it is that when they finally got a piece of the pie turned rotten. And these days, it's just like Jesse Jackson said, whether you came over on a slave ship or came over on the Mayflower, now we're all in the same boat. And I don't think he came to the same conclusions I have about socialism. But that same boat we're in, it looks like we're headed to slave ship Earth. Well, thank you very much. I just soon not go there. And, so I'm putting forward local community moral self-government, the revival of the form of government America started with, being real serious and sincere about the all in liberty and justice for all, okay? And I will go into this more when it comes time to talking about it, how to wind this all together. But I'm offering this up, local community moral self-government, as truly the effective form of reparations means to repair. In order to figure out how to get reparations, you need to figure out what's broke. And what's broke is this sense of citizenship and self-governance. That's what, was literally beaten out of the newly enslaved people and never allowed to form. And they've lived in a society where these decisions have always been made for them. And now within this great federal socialism, the same system holds true. The powers and the organic moral uplift, the powers and responsibility of self-government have never been in their hands. They've never had the hand of a sovereign. And so I can understand if people are a little hesitant thinking, I don't know, self-government is local self-government. Well, that's where you had Bull Connor. That's where you had all this, ugliness going on. And yes, that's true. But it wasn't because of the self-governance. It was because only white folks were allowed powers. I'm talking about having powers held by everyone. And, we could be looking at a society that I would imagine you might have with local community moral self-government, you might have some forms of separatism arise. But since you're going to have everybody following the laws that are written and treated equally under the law, if you're going to have a state that allows a white separatist community, that same state is going to have to allow a black separatist or an Asian separatist or a Muslim separatist community where nobody can sell property that doesn't belong in the group that they've designated, okay? Racially and ethnically conscious contracting is one of the things that have to be allowed. I don't see anything in the federal constitution forbidding that, but I do see where most states would forbid it today. If a bunch of people said we want to have separatism, they'd have to join together with separatists of a different stripe and get together and form and take over some state and do that thing there. I wouldn't join a community like that. I wouldn't encourage communities like that. But if that's what people want to do, I'm all in favor of people being able to do what they want. I want to form together in a community that is very multi-ethnic. I want to see every stripe of people learning to form together in a community and exercise the powers of self-government, be formed by the responsibilities. And then, there's been recently a analogy about young men that young men should take on fatherhood because we're really designed to handle that kind of a burden. Much as a big tractor trailer is actually designed to work best when it's got a 50-foot long trailer attached to it. And we need to recognize the same is true of local community moral self-government. Yes, it will be more difficult than slowly being fed pablum while we're being enslaved, turned into zombies, farmed as zombies, or whatever else is on the agenda. It's more difficult to be free than to be a slave. But it's also far more rewarding. I mean, you're talking about, raising the banner of freedom. Like I say, I see that as really the way to repair the damage that was done by the Great Enslavement in the Middle Passage. But it's also, I look at some of the writings like Nietzsche, and he talks about the ennui and the boredom. Well, he's speaking from the late 1800s in Europe when socialism was starting to rise and all the battles had been fought. It was just, the rise of the welfare state, kind of echoing uh, Fukuyama's essay about the end of history in the early 1980s or the mid 1980s. History didn't end. I guess the late 1980s. History didn't end then. And, Nietzsche's conclusion is, well, maybe we should have war because war really brings out the strength, makes people be the best they can possibly be. Well, actually, I think we've returned the powers of self-government to ourselves in our local communities. And, you feel this need and out of self-defense, you got to go down and become involved so the nuts next door don't take over. And I think it will cause us to be better people just in that regard, holding those powers, seeing them exercised, trying plans, getting people to listen to you, finding out that didn't work, but this might, finding out that we can learn and grow and hold on to this and actually better our communities, better ourselves. These are burdens I believe nature gives us. And I think these centralized systems slowly bring about a culture of enslavement. One of my pet phrases is apathy is the philosophy of slaves. You don't care about something if you don't have any say in it. And that's what's kind of grown out of slavery and has never been remedied in this country because of the unbelievable level of racism, which is another subject that I don't think I'll hit on in this series because it doesn't pertain directly to local community moral self-government. But I will say, I think the United States has the most virulent strain, or at least it used to, the most virulent strain of racism the world has ever seen. So anyway, that is episode number 16. I hope nobody's looking to shoot me. I hope people will listen and receive this in the spirit it's given, because I want to see us come together as a people and get past all this racist idiocy. Thank you. Be sure and share. Another short time on this segment tonight. Same old whiteboard with the same old blog address and the basic. Now, for tonight's edition, number 16 is not included in that book length links. So it's at lifeinaffairs country.blogspot/healing-oldest-wound.html. That's where you can find the writing of what I just went into. Quite a bit more in there too. Once again, thanks for watching, and be sure to share everything.